Ladies and gentlemen, little sirs and little ma'ams, my name is Zane Morris, and I'm going to be your host for this Introduction to Roll of Fate video. Now, before I jump directly into the explanation and the mechanics of the video, I'd like to go over one little tidbit. Everything you see in this video will be all raw footage. The only portion of it that won't be raw is I will be recording it in segments, and they will be uploaded at the end, so it's a little bit easier for me to bookmark them and make it easier to navigate when we're all finished. So what I'd like to do first is talk about myself a little bit and my history as a gamer since I've been young. I started out playing Nintendo, beating Mario and things like that whenever I was about 2 years old. Progressed to Super Nintendo, Super Mario World, Turtles in Time, all the great games. Finally, when I was moving into my transitioning, if you will, into my high school years, I started getting into massive multiplayer online games. And, well, before high school, I was playing games like Magic the Gathering and Pokemon, I think, was one of the big hot ticket items when I was in high school. But as I started transitioning into MMOs, it was an expansion of my mind, if you will, and just teaching me about how games operate as a whole. EverQuest was an extremely large inspiration in my life, and I loved every single minute of EverQuest and everything that had to do with the game as far as the community, the lore, the questing, and all the secrets therein that were just hidden within the game. Just made for a wonderful experience. But that's enough of the games that dictated my past, so now allow me to talk about the game that's going to dictate my future. I'm going to go over a quick topic list of what you can expect to see in this video, and then we'll jump right into it. First, I'll start with a basic introduction to Roll of Fate and the genre and type of game that it is. Then we'll move into the card types and how to interpret the cards as a whole. Then shift to the core game mechanics. After that, I'll cover the full how to play explanation, kind of go over the manual, but with visual aids, so that way it's much easier to understand. The game types that will be available in Roll of Fate, and how to obtain cards as a whole. Since I'm mentioning cards, most of you have been able to distinguish and discern that this is going to be a deck builder and collectible card style RPG. We'll jump into what Fabrinium is, and I'll give a full explanation, and I'll answer a lot of the frequently asked questions that I've been receiving through the Discord channel. After that, I'll transition to my hopes and dreams for Roll of Fate and where I hope the game will go and what I would hope to see the community evolve into as time goes on. Lastly, and I put this at the end of the video for a very specific reason because not everybody likes TLDR, but I will go into an extended personal introduction of myself and a full-blown history of Roll of Fate and where it came from, when it started, and how I've gotten to the point where I'm at now. So sit back, sit tight, and let's roll. All right, so hop, skip, and jump into the basic meat and potatoes and the basic introduction for Roll of Fate and genre. Roll of Fate's going to be a competitive team-oriented tabletop RPG. Like many tabletop RPGs, you'll see things such as stat tracking and dice rolls. Deck building for Roll of Fate and strategic planning for team compositions and synergy will all make up part of its core foundation. The game will traditionally be played on a grid-based battlefield or game board map. A visual example will be provided later in the how-to portion of the video. You'll be able to find that down in the bookmarks. So a battlefield is where all the action will take place, but other realm shapers may use them for movement while they're hosting a campaign in player versus environment style gameplay. That's kind of left up to the realm shapers. And because Roll of Fate is a tabletop RPG, think of it as a pen and paper style game. That doesn't mean it always needs pen and paper, but it does involve chance-based combat and scenarios that will be dictated by dice rolls, or as we refer to them, a fate check. The card aspect brings into play a very interesting way of allowing events to unfold for campaigns, quests, combat. And because campaigns are created by a realm shaper, the term that you heard before, that's what Roll of Fate refers to as a narrator for an individual campaign. The person who created it is unfolding this quest or adventure for the players on the other side of the table. But due to the games having a realm shaper, there's going to be a little aspect that realm shapers will be able to manipulate the rule sets of their games. While Roll of Fate will have its own core rule set, player-hosted campaigns have a little bit of finagling room. We'll cover a little bit more about realm shapers later in the video, but ideally, just think of them pretty much as the person who has created that particular adventure. So now let's take a small look at how Roll of Fate differs a bit from similar card games and other tabletops. First, card rarity. In many card games that you've probably played, you have your typical common, uncommon, rare. Sometimes they toss in SS rare, etc. UR. In Roll of Fate, you will have additional rarity cards. Common, uncommon, rare, very rare, and uniques, which we'll go into a little bit later. But where the unique portion of it comes in, most cards will be able to be featured as commons, uncommons, rares, or possibly even very rares. So finding a card that fits a common, for example, you may find that same card later as a rare and the stats are a bit different, but it might fit into a completely different niche for a different deck. Some player may require the extra power that the rare gives, where some players just need it to have its basic function, and they would prefer to use it as a common because it costs a little bit less attunement. Attunement's one of the statistics in Roll of Fate, and we'll get into that a little bit later in the video as well. Unique cards. So I'll talk to you guys about the concept of unique cards, but stay tuned with me so that way I can go into it deeper later. Unique cards are basically one-off cards. Typically, they have to do with the lore of the game, and it just wouldn't make sense for a particular lore character to have a weapon or piece of armor that was specifically made for them, and there to exist 30 of them. It just doesn't make sense. We'll cover it more in depth later, but just know that unique cards are supposed to act as trump cards in a way, or surprises in battle, since one can never truly know what their opponent is holding under their sleeve, but they'll be balanced in a way that they won't feel overpowered at all. It's just simply a different surprise for their opponents in the battlefield. Roll of Fate's also essentially going to be a live game that allows the community to shape how it unfolds. The game will feature event scenario lore battles, things of that nature that will show the community as a whole whether or not they want to come together, or if they want to decide to hold the information that they have strictly based on they would like to be the first to complete it. As people start to push through these events, depending on how they choose to complete them, or if they're the first to complete them, may unlock a vast variety of awards for the entire community, or specifically for them as a whole, but it may also shape the next expansion for the game that releases based on how they decide to finish that particular event. Roll of Fate will also essentially be team-based in every component. The player versus environment, player versus player matches, all team-based. The official campaign is where the core potatoes are for Roll of Fate. There will be a live-streamed campaign for Roll of Fate, which will have randomly selected players. These players will be given a choice or a variety of different quests or end goals they wish to seek out. The official campaign is one of the largest proponents for pushing and shaping the overall trajectory for Roll of Fate. If the official campaign decides to take the left fork in the road, that may result in a completely different trajectory for the game as if they would have taken the right fork. So it does allow for a very large amount of input from the community as a whole to help shape the way it goes, which I don't really think you see much in games at all today. I know a lot of people are trying to do it, but because this game is not digital and it's played in PvP fashion and essentially a tabletop card game, there's a lot more freedom and wiggle room with this. So, that being said, we'll jump over to the next topic. Understand where you might find the stats, card text, and other indicators on the card, and just overall how to read them. It'll all come together making sense later. I promise, so just stick with me. So, there are two types of cards in Roll of Fate. You've got actions and reactions. The three cards that you're seeing up here, just so all three happen to be equipment, they will fall under actions, simply because equipment can also be played in the middle of a game to swap your equipment out. But we'll get all into that once we start to hit the how to play portion of the video. Under actions, you have skills, spells, curses, items, equipment, and minion cards. Under reactions, you'll have disruptions, intercepts, and retaliations. Now, with the card types being known, let's just take an overall quick look at where you'll be able to find each indicator on the card. So as you can see with the lollipop wand, the statistics are typically shown under the name of the card on the left side of the book page. Card text usually follows right after, which is pretty traditional in most cases. The card text should always be interpreted exactly like it's written. Sometimes that'll be a little bit difficult, but that's exactly why we'll have judges for official campaign or the official campaign, and as well for tournaments, so they can help players interpret the written text if it becomes a little difficult. As you can see, the lollipop wand's basic attack function is replaced with a heal for 1 fate check 4, meaning they would roll a 4-sided dice instead of being able to basic attack with that weapon, is all that's saying. On the right side of the page, you'll see at the top, it tells you weapon, wand, katana, or accessory spellbook. It's just giving you a general idea of what that piece of equipment is or card is that you're using. There you may see a spell or an item. Sometimes it might even have underneath item a specific type of card, item, elixir, item, food, just letting you know what it is that you're playing. And those particular descriptions are important and will come into play, as players will see when they start reading through a little bit of the card descriptions. As you can see, the names are all different colors. The Lollipop Wand, Lunar Forge Katana, and the Tomb of Scorching Runes all have different colored names. The name text on cards will depict their rarity. We'll go over that a little bit later, or at least I will upload that in a later video, because I don't believe I've put it into this one, or at least into the curriculum for this one. You'll notice on the Lollipop Wand it says range 1, as where the Lunaforge Katana has what looks like it could be a fixed range. That's because that's exactly what it is. Anytime you see range with a number, that's indicating that it's a variable range and will allow you to move that many squares away to attack or place that effect on a target. As we're on the Lunaforge Katana, it has a variable, or sorry, my mistake, it has a fixed range of how it can attack. The Lunaforge Katana, the purple squares indicating area of effect range, means that whenever the bearer of a Lunaforge Katana goes to attack with a basic attack, he would hit all 3 squares in front of him. The white square indicating the player's location, the 3 squares in front of him would be his area of effect or attack range if he was basic attacking with that weapon. You look over with the Tome of Scorching Runes, and you'll see on the right side it says Magic Catalyst. Yet again, another thing that will be explained in the how-to, but it does discern that that particular card serves as a magical catalyst, which, big surprise, will allow players to cast magical spells. So let's talk a little bit about the squiggly little lightning ball. By the way, that icon's probably going to change. But that is the attunement icon. The attunement icon indicates how much attunement must be spent to play that card. Equipment, as you'll notice later when I show some other examples of cards later in the how-to, other items won't depict the second attunement symbol with the chains around it. That indicates the locked amount of attunement. Equipment must be paid to equip, but after it's equipped, retains a portion of the player's overall attunement to remain equipped. Bottom right, you'll notice that there is flavor text. Not all cards will have it, but it's worth paying attention to because there might be some hidden lore in there. Or if you're just a lore hunter, it's really cool to read. So that gives a general description of how to read the cards and interpret what's on them. We'll go into more depth here in one of the next portions of the video where we start to really explain how the cards function in a battle scenario. So let's move on to that. Rollers, rollers, rollers. Let's move right on over to the game mechanics. We'll start off with some glossary of terms, abbreviations that we will use commonly in a Roll of Fate game or even in the game manual. I'm going to kind of skip through these a little fast, so hopefully the visual interpretation will help you keep up. RoF, commonly referred to as the game, Roll of Fate. FC, that's a fate check. Essentially, it's a dice roll that will determine different variables during combat. DMG, an abbreviation for damage. Most RPGers are pretty commonly used term. We're pretty much all associated with it, and we understand it and recognize it as being a norm for role-playing games. Stats refers to roll statistics, or as you'll see an example here in a minute, it can refer to statistics of minion creatures that are summoned during battle. DEF, abbreviation for any type of defense. Usually commonly has an M or a P before it, meaning magical or physical defense. The M being magical, P being physical. DEF, as a term as a whole, will encompass both types of defense. So if you see that on a card, it just means both if you don't see it accompanied by an M or a P. Phys, abbreviation for physical sources of damage. ATK, pretty common for abbreviation for attack, also can be accommodated or accompanied by a P or an M, physical or magical source of attack damage. AoE, area of effect. AoE refers to a specific area that an action will cover. So if you have an area of effect attack or heal, a spell, a curse that has a specific fixed area of attack range, it's just letting you know that it will hit that entire area. Banished. Banishment is a term Roll of Fate uses for cards that are removed from play permanently, unless a specific card text brings it back into the game. Otherwise, that card has been removed from the game and may longer jump its way back into play. Avatar refers to the physical board piece a player uses to represent where they're standing and which way they're facing. I haven't quite narrowed it down whether or not I'd like to use resin coins that players can paint or if I want to go the miniature route. So stay tuned to be there for the poll that helps me decide which one, because I'm kind of waffling in the middle of it. BOT and EOT. These terms refer to the beginning of turn effects. Some cards will have effects that trigger at the beginning of a player's turn, and some will have effects that trigger at the end of turn or end of a player's turn. So keep an eye on those for specifics on whether or not the card activates at the beginning or the end of the turn. So let's remove this from the display and let's go ahead and bring up this minion, shall we? All right, there we go. Look at that tasty little specter. He's ready to eat souls, man. That's what I'm talking about. Okay, now that we've gone over some of the indexes and terms, we'll move over to the statistics, and Let's see where these bad boys are at. Bloop. Okay. Statistics. What are you doing? Whoa, whoa, what's happening here? Oh, unacceptable. Unacceptable. There we go. Okay. Nice. Okay, so let's go over the base statistics for the game. We've got vitality, physical attack, magical attack, physical defense, magical defense, speed, and movement. Pretty much everybody who's going to be playing this game can read, right? Vitality represents the amount of damage your roll can sustain before incapacitation. Physical attack modifier typically will affect physical skills, but not always. We'll go over that here in a little bit. M attack, same thing, just affects spell damage or spells in general. Can affect it in many different ways. P def and M def, physical defense and magical defense, assists with reducing incoming physical and or spell damage based on the variable. Speed determines turn order and also can affect some actions in the game. Movement controls the number of spaces a player may move on a battlefield. Pretty simplistic and straightforward. So let's take a quick look over at the Vengeful Spectre. We'll move over and look at this minion and just kind of take an overall view at like how the mechanics can come into play. Vengeful Spectre, as you can see, costs 4 attunement to bring into play. He has a range of 1 when he's attacking, which means he can only attack in the square above him, behind him, to his right, or to his left. Attacking diagonally is not an option unless it's stated otherwise on the card. So when counting squares for range or movement purposes, the typical go-to is going to be no diagonal movement and no diagonal attacking. To go diagonal, you would actually need a range of 2, meaning 1 square above you and then to the right and or left. As you can see, the minion here, he attacks with 1 fate check 4, which means he rolls 1 4-sided dice when he attacks. But as we go through and we look at the Vengeful Spectre's primary statistics, he has 14 vitality. He has a movement rating of 5, which means he can move 5 squares. He has 4 magic attack and 4 magical defense. The other stats that aren't listed there should just be assumed that they're 0. Anytime a stat's not listed on a minion, just assume it's 0. Vengeful Spectre's attack gains magic attack modifier. What this means is when the Spectre deals damage, if a Spectre rolls a 4-sided die and it lands on a 3, this Spectre's magical attack currently, he has no buffs on him because we're just using the raw card and the raw variable. He would deal 3 damage plus the 4 magic attack modifier, which would bring him up to 7 damage. When he deals damage to his opponent, magical damage is reduced by that opponent's magical defense. So if you read next, when Vengeful Spectre deals damage, the target loses 1 attunement. The target he's dealing damage to is now taking 7 points of damage. So unless they have 7 or higher magic defense, they are taking damage and would then lose 1 attunement. Vengeful Spectre can't be healed and takes double damage from healing actions performed on him. Basically, you can't heal the guy. But players who are utilizing healing action cards can actually deal increased amounts of damage to the Vengeful Spectre if he's close enough or they're in range to target him with said healing action. That'll bring us over to talking about buffs, debuffs, ailments, and curses, and using dice for counters. When buffs and debuffs, etc., ailments and curses are placed on players, typically they will have a duration. They'll last for so many turns. Having additional dice when playing Roll of Fate is not a bad idea, because if you place a buff or a debuff on an opponent or one of their minions, you would ideally like to be able to track 2 things. 1, how much the buff is increasing their stats, and 2, how many rounds or turns the buff is lasting. Now, I am going to be designing a specific UI interface around the cards that will allow players to help track their turns. So if they don't have additional dice, or they would just like to separate that from the variable that's going to be giving the stat counter or stat tracker, it makes it a little bit easier for players to just turn the buff and know how many turns are remaining. And the dice can just be the counter for the variable that's increasing or decreasing their stats. So take this for example. If the player who summoned the Vengeful Spectre or a teammate were to buff Vengeful Spectre's magical attack, that's just going to make his attack each turn more powerful, because his 1 FC4, his 4-sided dice roll, is also gaining the magic attack modifier each time he attacks. Going into how minions are used on a whole basis will be in the next portion of the video in the full how to play explanation, but that kind of gives a quick breakdown of how the statistics can affect cards and how buffs, debuffs, and curses work. Ultimately, it all boils down to read the text on the card. Text on the card is absolute, and it'll never steer you wrong. So now explaining fate checks and stat modifiers. We went over it a little bit. As you see, different cards will have different fate checks associated with them. This minion attacks with a 1 fate check 4. But if we go down and look, we can check out Lunar Forge Katana. Lunar Forge Katana shows that it rolls a 1 fate check 10, which means it rolls 1 10-sided dice, which means it has a pretty wide range of how much damage it can deal. But if you look, it has AoE squares. Purple are referred to as AoE squares. Red is when it's only a single target, but it's letting you know the range. So the katana can have a variable of 1 to 10, but if you notice, the katana does increase physical attack, has physical attack statistic additions along with vitality. The katana doesn't gain the additional physical attack modifier, so whatever is rolled with that katana, unless there's some other card in play that gives this player their additional physical attack modifier to their weapon, whatever the player would roll if they're basic attacking with the katana is the amount of damage that it's going to do. I think that about sums up most of the game mechanics and how to interpret them, so we will move on to the full how to play explanation, going from the beginning of a game to walking through an entire mock turn of a player and what it might look like moving around the board, drawing cards, how attunement works in depth. And we'll see where that takes us. All right, rollers, let's get into the meat and potatoes of this video. I think what everybody's really here to see, the entire how to play explanation. So first, before we jump into that, let's really talk about what do you need to play Roll of Fate? Well, a starter pack would probably be a good place to start. It'll get you pretty much all the startup items you're going to need. A roll card, which you can see depicted here as the chef. A minimum 35 card deck. A battlefield, which will be randomly selected and placed in each starter deck. And an avatar piece, which, as mentioned previously in the video, I haven't quite nailed down what I want to do with those yet. So, the only thing that won't be provided in starter packs, as of this current point in time in development, is dice. For all tabletop RPGs, I recommend having a nice bag of dice. Typically works best when playing any tabletop RPG, and some card games as well. So let's kind of move right over here and just go through a mock up of what the beginning of gameplay might look like for for all players. So you'll start the game, and all players will place their roles that they have chosen to play on the table, and the equipment that they are choosing to equip during pre-game. So the pre-game phase begins. So for this particular example, we're going to assume that the player is playing the chef role. All players begin during pre-game phase with 10 attunement. 1, 0, boom, 10. Okay, so I'm going to take this Let's take the chef right here, move him down, make him a little bit bigger just so everybody could see. We'll even move his. Now again, the renditions of these cards are not necessarily final. The signature ability and the passive for the chef, along with his base statistics or her base statistics, are likely going to change. So don't pay too much attention to that. Let's just focus on the actual core mechanics. So everybody starts with 10 attunement. All right. What that means is you have 10 attunement to spend. I'm not really sure why my camera's frozen, but I don't care. We're just going to make me disappear for now. All right, rooters. Going right back. So we've got 10 attunement. You have displayed the role that you're going to play as the chef. Now it's time to do pregame equipping. Let's say that this player only wants to equip one item for pregame. The Tome of Scorching Runes. As you can see here, the Tome of Scorching Runes costs 4 attunement to play and has 2 locked attunement, meaning in the pregame, this player's attunement would drop down to 6 during pregame, which is okay. That attunement is there and is meant to be spent, because once the game actually begins and starts, well, that attunement's going to go right back up to 11 for everybody, because when turn 1 starts, everybody's attunement is replenished and you gain +1 to maximum attunement. But here's where the locked attunement comes into play. Player would go right back up to 10 attunement. You were correct on that. Or 11, I'm sorry. Player would go back up to 11 attunement. But due to the fact that they have 2 attunement locked, they are now at 9. And going forward from that point on in the game, each turn, their attunement would replenish and gain +1. So a person who had no equipment or only equipment that had 0 locked attunement on it would be at the maximum from the get-go, meaning on turn 1, 11 attunement, turn 2, 12 attunement, and so on. People who have locked attunement due to their equipment increasing their stats and giving them extra abilities will be operating off of what attunement is left that isn't locked, which means if a player decided on turn 1 to equip 4 items that all cost 2 attunement and had 2 locked attunement, they would start with 10 in pregame. All 4 pieces, each piece would cost them 2, leaving them, which just allows them to equip all of them. They have not breached the 10 that they're allotted during pregame. And now they would also have 8 attunement that's locked, meaning at the beginning of turn 1, when it's their turn, their attunement would start at 2 plus the 1. Turn 1, they would have 3 attunement. Turn 4, they would have 4 attunement. 5, 6, 7, and so on. And that attunement stays locked as long as they have that equipment on their rolls. That's one of the ways the game balances the amount of cards that they can play each turn in early game versus how strong their roll is with all of the equipment they've decided to pack onto it. So, after each player has decided what equipment that they want to start the game with, and they've placed their rolls onto the table, the improvise phase begins. Now everybody sees what's on the table and they know kind of what they're expecting from their opponent. So, you go to what is known as your battle reserves. When you start a game, you need a roll card, all of the previously mentioned items, at least a minimum of a 35 card deck, but it can be up to 50. The up to 4 pieces of equipment that you equip on your character, your weapon, your armor, your accessory, and or your teaching, those do not count towards your card count. So technically you could have a 54 card deck if you were going to equip 4 pieces of equipment at the beginning of the game. You're allowed to have 10 battle reserve cards. Those are cards that are sidelined, but allow you to mix and match at the beginning of a particular battle based on what you're seeing. It looks like what might benefit you the most versus the opponents that you're looking at. So you can swap cards in and out one for one. You can't just add battle reserves, meaning if you have a 35 card deck, you can't just put all 10 battle reserve cards in your deck. You have chosen a 35 card deck to start with, which means you could cycle out 5 cards from your deck and gain 5 cards from your battle reserves, but the total card count for your deck would stay 35. So after each player goes through their improvise phase, each player would go ahead and place their avatar on any square within the 4 back rows of their battlefield, and then they would perform quick calculations of their current statistics with equipment modifiers, just to give them a quick update of what their base stats now look like. For example, the Tomb of Scorching Runes would now take the chef to 6 magical attack. I do apologize for the conflicting icons. The magical attack that you see on that chef card is on the far left. It looks a little bit like a magical staff, which has been changed to a magical spell book that you see on the Tome of Scorching Runes. I'll enlarge it so everybody can see. And the magical defense, which is also, I apologize because the icon has been changed. Right next to magic attack, you see what looks like on the chef card, a shield that's deflecting lightning, is now this barrier that you see on the Tomb of Scorching Runes. But back to the topic at hand. The chef would now have 6 magical attack and 6 magical defense, retaining their 8 speed, their 36 vitality, 4 movement, 1 physical defense, and 1 physical attack. That's just for quick reference in case they're taking damage and they now know the variables to report to their opponent, which they can always quickly calculate and report on the battlefield. That's not a problem either. After calculations, turn order is established. And if you remember, in the previous segment, speed is what determines turn order. So obviously, the player with the highest speed will be first. In the event that there is a tie, those 2 players would roll at 1 FC20, a 20-sided dice, and the highest roller would choose if they go before or after the player that they were tied with for speed and turn order. After turn order has been established, all players will draw their 8 cards for their base starting hand, and a player may choose up to 3 cards that they don't want, shuffle them back in their deck, and draw the same amount that they have discarded. Meaning you could have 3 cards in your hand that you just absolutely think are complete trash for early game, and you could toss them back into the deck, shuffle it, draw 3 more, but you are going to lose 3 vitality for it. For each card exchange that way, it's a 1 vitality penalty. After that, now all players have their hands. Everybody looks like they're ready to go. Roles have been established. I'm going to shrink these real fast, just so that way we have a little bit better room that I can show some additional input. So I'm going to shrink those. Should still be visible on the computer screen, but now, cosmetic mats for players will look something like this. So players might have their own mat that they want to utilize for cosmetic purposes, but there will also be utilitarian aspects to player mats once they're completed also. This Jester playmat doesn't feature it, but there will be trackers for vitality and attunement so players can easily track them rather than using dice or any other particular type of tracking method, pen and paper, etc. So players then, if they were using a playmat, could just place their cards on their mat. I do apologize. This, for example purposes, the chef card is not double-sided, but in the actual printed representation, roll cards will be printed double-sided. So this card would actually only take up the same amount of space and would Could really be placed anywhere the player wanted it to be placed. But makes sense, most sense to me, that someone would probably want to place it directly in the center of the mat, just to depict what role they are playing. So now we're going to move into the turn phases. Round 1 would begin. Player with the fastest speed would then begin their turn. The player would draw a card. He would replenish his attunement back to 10, but since it's the first round, at the beginning of every player's turn of each round, the player would gain +1 to their maximum attunement up to the soft maximum cap, the soft maximum cap for attunement of 20. It can be, the hard cap can be raised by card effects, but the soft cap is 20 for a balancing reason. The player would replenish back to their maximum attunement that's not locked +1 because we are now in round 1. And beginning of turn tracking phase would be the next thing. On turn 1, I highly doubt there's going to be any BOT phases or effects that need to be tracked, but you never know. They would draw their 1 card. Oh, sorry, we covered that. Draw the card, add the 1 to the attunement, back to full. And then they would move on to their movement phase. Let's go ahead and get up a battleground example. Boop. Ooh, man, that is sweet. Pop. Okay, there we go. Move this bad boy back over here. Chef card. Chef roll. Boop, boop. All right. Okay. Player would then begin their movement phase. So let us look at how players would move. I don't think I'm going to be able to draw on top of that. I don't think so. Nope. I can always bring it up. You know what? I'll tell you what I'll do. We'll get rid of the one inside of the recording video, and we'll just pop this one on there. We will move the chef. Move the chef back. And then we'll take this jester and make him disappear. So now we can draw directly on top of the movement board. Okay. So for purposes of explanation, let's just say that the jester decided he wanted to begin here. All right. Jester has a movement of 4, which means he may move up to 4 spaces. 1, 2, 3, 4. Remember, diagonal movement is not allowed unless otherwise specified by card effects and or role passives or other effects that would allow him to do so. 1, 2, 3, 4. Now it is important to note that during your movement phase, you are not required to move the maximum amount of spaces that your role has for a movement stat. That's just the limit that you may move, up to 4 spaces for this particular chef. Increase your movement, the farther you can move across the board at any given point in time. Go ahead and remove those and just go back to where the chef is at. Chef starting area. After the chef gives a chance to move around, he would jump right into his action phase. 1, 2, 3, 4. Let's give him an opponent right here. Blue dot becoming the opponent. Well, the chef does not have any weapons equipped right now, which means he's only attacking with his bare hands. This is something that can be found in the game manual, but we'll cover it real fast just because we're in the mid-tutorial, or we're in the beginner tutorial video. When you have no weapon equipped, you're only attacking with your fists, which allows only the attacking of 1 square range, which means the jester would only be able to hit the 4 squares that are lit up in purple. So he wouldn't be able to hit this particular opponent of his unless he is playing a card that has more range that would allow for it. Now, if the Jester, for example, had a card with the range of 2, yes, he could hit his opponent because 1, 2, making him eligible to play that card and successfully strike his opponent. Now, let me rephrase there. Allowing him to play the card and attempt at striking his opponent. During the action phase, anytime you are dealing damage to an opponent, and it is not spell related, all attacks, all physical attacks, have a base 90% chance to hit your opponent, which means your opponent has a 10% chance that it misses. That'll get covered here in a little bit as we start to discuss dice rolls, which will be standardized for gameplay. So that way we don't have players getting confused about how dice rolls work. So, their activation phase. If the Jester decided he wanted to use that action with 2 range, he would then roll a 20-sided dice. Now, because the dice is 20-sided, that means that each side represents a 5% chance per side. Meaning if you have a 90% chance to hit your opponent, only 18 sides of the dice would indicate a successful hit, while 2 would indicate a miss. So a 1 and a 2 on the 20-sided dice would indicate in a miss or a failure, while a 3 through 20 would be a success. Successful hit. So if the Jester decided he wanted to play that particular action, he would then roll to see his accuracy. He rolls a 20-sided dice and rolls a 10. Success. He would then read the card, determine the amount of damage that would need to be rolled, or if the card had a fixed amount of damage. Some cards in Roll of Fate will just say deal 4 magical damage or 4 fire damage to your opponent. In which case, it would be a base 4 damage before mitigation. So if it's 4 physical damage and the opponent has 2 physical defense, 4 physical minus the 2 physical defense would result in a 2 points of vitality damage to the opponent. Now that we've covered how actions work, we'll go into the reaction phase, because at this point, when a player is activating an action, any other player within range or the player being attacked can utilize reaction cards. The reaction card types were covered earlier in the video, but generally speaking, you have a few types. You have cards that are based on interception, which a player may intercept the damage being dealt to one of his allies or teammates. You have a retaliation, which means the player would take said damage, but would instantly counterattack, if you will, based on what the card text reads. And then you have disruptions, which typically cancel the effect of the card that your opponent would be playing. Disruptions typically have higher attunement costs, and sometimes they come with strict requirements to be played. After the activation phase, if the Jester has not moved at all, in this example, this does not apply because we have our Jester moving 4 spaces, but let's say the Jester, for the sake of this example, started on number 4 and had not moved and decided he wanted to go right into his activation phase and attack his squared foe. After his activation phase, he goes into another movement phase. Because he has not used his movement, he may now turn tail if he wishes to, and 1, 2, 3, 4 may run away. After that last movement phase, we move into directional, discard, and end of turn phase. Direction refers to which direction the jester wants to face at the end of his turn. This is important because attacks from behind take place in Roll of Fate, and they deal extra damage and have other debilitating effects that come with them. So strategically facing your role a specific way, or your avatar, is crucial to success with the strategy. Any cards over the allotted hand amount, which is currently set to 10, the jester would now need to discard, or I'm sorry, I keep saying jester because of the playmat. The chef would then need to discard any cards in excess of 10 in his hand. That number is subject to change because we're still in early beta phases. After discarding, the chef would perform all end of turn card effects. Excuse me. And after performing end of turn card effects such as, for example, poison, if the chef was poisoned and at the end of his turn he had to take 3 poison damage for each poison stack on his roll or his avatar, this effect would happen at that time, and then the chef's turn would end, and it would move to the next player in line, meaning whoever had the second highest speed. And then everything would start over from the draw, replenish, and beginning of turn track phase that we were speaking about just a couple minutes ago. These phases repeat until the end of the game, and the game will end when an entire team has been incapacitated and their vitality has been reduced to 0. There will be more in-depth how-tos on how to play, and over time videos will begin to be uploaded of mock games being played by myself and my testing team, which will probably give a lot more insight because we can annotate and do commentary during the videos to kind of let the community know exactly what we're doing and why we're doing it. As far as the turn phases are concerned, the last thing we'll cover will be called weariness. In the event a player has drawn out of cards and now has no more cards because their entire deck has been exhausted, they will shuffle their entire discard pile, banished cards don't count, back into their deck, and they will enter the weariness state. They immediately lose 5 vitality, and they'll draw 3 cards. Every card they draw during the weariness state from then on out, and they will remain in weariness until they die, causes them to lose an additional 2 vitality. Weariness for them will last until the end of the game or until they're incapacitated. One more mechanic that's being implemented into the game, and you'll start to see as we start finishing some of the battlefield maps, battlefields will come with their own hazards, meaning if a game has been going on for too long, for instance, round 10, when all players would have the max 20 attunement, round 11 will start implementing hazardous effects to players, which will be listed with the battlefields so people know what they're getting themselves into pre-game. Once they've seen what battlefield in a tournament setting that they're playing in, they'll have a good idea of how they might have to rearrange their strategy based on if their strategy happens to be to try to outlast their opponent to the very end. Depending on what that particular battlefield's hazard might be, it might make it kind of difficult for them to turtle their way all the way to the end. Again, we'll go into more in-depth breakdowns of moving around battlefields and mock gameplay in the future, but right now we're just trying to cover the basics. So let's prepare for the next segment of the video. Hey, I'm back and my camera's not acting like a total piece of poop now, so let's continue over next. Okay, Roll of Fate. What are all the ways to play Roll of Fate? Well, you'll have typical player versus player combat, which will likely be one of the core modes to allow team versus team battling. Let some teams put their decks together, strategize, jump on the board, duel it out, and see who comes out on top. Let's see who's got the best strategy and the best team synergy. Let's see who works best together overall. Then you've got player versus environment. Naturally, this will occur and play in many ways just like other tabletop RPGs that you may have seen in the past. Similar games would be things such as Dungeons and Dragons, pen and paper RPGs. I think Fallout had their own. There's a whole plethora of them. But Roll of Fate will also feature the card dynamics, so that'll change things up a little bit. But in player versus environment, typically you'll have one person, a realm shaper, who creates and manifests a world for his players to immerse themselves in, gives them a goal or a quest to achieve, or maybe they just want to let people dive in and kind of wade through a little bit more of an open world, kind of like the core game of Roll of Fate. Then we have player versus creator. These will be lore-based and scenario-based events that are sometimes triggered by the official campaign, which we'll cover next, and they may trigger a specific event or scenario that players can then sign up for. Over here we have the Archlich Zathran. From time to time, players may see when the scenarios pop up or are available. These particular scenarios will be signed up events, and for now will be played online. So you would need some type of device, either a webcam or your smartphone, to be able to display your deck so we know you're not cheating and you can communicate with the other players and show them what cards you're playing. But for an example, as you see here, the Archlich Zathran, this right now is just the general mock-up of what we have going on for the Archlich fight. And as it may come as no surprise, he's probably going to be the first event boss that gets released. But this gives a real good insight into how events and the official campaign affect the entire world of Roll of Fate. You'll notice here, the first team to defeat the Archlich will receive a global unlock reward of unlocking the Lich roll. What a global unlock means is it unlocks the Lich roll to now be purchased through starter decks or to be found in packs or caches. Now the Lich roll is available to the entire public of the game. So completing scenario or lore boss events isn't simply only for the people who do it. Sometimes the global rewards might encourage the community to come together and say, hey, we know at phase 3 portion of this fight, X happens. Me mentioning phase 3 brings me to an interesting point. Most of the scenario and lore boss battles should be looked at as mechanic-based fights. You should be thinking MMO-based fights on a grid-based board system. Sometimes there may be mechanics that you can't just fight your way through. You have to specifically engage the battlefield or different pieces on the board in different ways. You may have to dodge attacks specifically because the afflictions that come with that attack, you can't power your way through them. So that's a good note to remember about the lore-based events and the scenario battles. But also, you'll notice with Defeat the Arc Glitch comes the world's first example title. Don't have a name for it yet, but the first team to take down the Arc Lich the very first time would be the only 4 people to ever get this title. The achievements on the scenarios are one and dones. The first team to complete this additional achievement, defeat the Arc Lich without killing any of his minions. Right now, it's an example of reward: 4 times foiled Skeletal Champion alternate arc cards. That means that each player who was a part of that team will receive 4 copies of the Skeletal Champion alternate art card, giving them a few to keep for themselves, or if they want to trade them all, they can do that too. That's a little bit of good insight into the player versus creator. Now let's talk about the official campaign. Much like the scenario and lore events, the official campaign will be hosted with either myself or another developer on my team. Currently, it's just me making this game, but I do have a friend from high school who is helping me nudge along through all of the art. A lot of the art you see in the game is done by myself. A few of the pieces have been collaborated with other artists, but I do have a little bit of help right now, but more people are coming to the team in the near future. So, back to talking about the official campaign. The official campaign should be viewed as an open world MMO. Everything that happens in the official campaign will affect official campaigns thereafter and affect the world as a whole. That is the true meaning of what is trying to be conveyed when I say a community-based tabletop RPG. The choices that your enemies or your allies make will affect players that may not even know they are going to get a chance to join the official campaign. Since the official campaign, while it's being hosted, after a team completes their particular challenge or quest or dies or is incapacitated for that fact, a new team of 4 for the official campaign would then be chosen and notified with a specific time limit saying, hey, you've been chosen for the official campaign, and if you'd like to participate, please email me back. And that's how the official campaign is going to be set up currently. But it will be a live streamed event so other players can talk and engage while they watch the players wade their way through the Everrealm. Ultimately, that is what is going to decide a lot of the trajectory that Roll of Fate takes. Specific card expansions may come out prior to others, or specific role cards may get unlocked a little bit before others, simply due to the choices that the community is making. So that pretty much covers the majority of the ways to play. And next up is how you'll obtain cards to play Roll of Fate. And the obtaining cards section. All right, obviously, with a deck building style game, you got to have cards, right? So how do you get cards in Roll of Fate? Quick depiction right here. But before we talk about how you buy cards, let's look at how can you earn cards? Well, what was discussed previously with the ways to play, the PvE function of the game that exists for player-made campaigns and things of that nature, a lot of the card images and functions will be uploaded to the Roll of Fate website, which I'll provide at the end of the video. But the game will feature a free-to-play function. You'll be able to sit down with your friends, use roll sheets, and create your own characters with a pen and paper, and really you wouldn't need to buy a thing. But if you're wanting to play competitive, or you're wanting to compete against other players for sleigh rights of lore bosses, or maybe you just want to be competitive in PvP, you're going to need cards. Promotional cards for the pre-release of the game is one of the things you'll be able to find on the website through the date before the game releases, hence the pre-release. We'll be doing 3 promo drops of cards. Those will be the only cards that Roll of Fate ever sells outright. After that, cards will need to either be purchased randomly through booster packs, or gained randomly through caches, earned through PvP tournaments or PvE official campaign, or player versus creator events. Sometimes you might see rewards for cards in other fashions, such as being given away for Fabrinium. Fabrinium is the digital currency that's being created for Roll of Fate, but it's a controlled currency. The currency for Fabrinium, which we'll cover in the next snippet of videos, you can't buy Fabrinium. It can be gained through subscription tiers, but players won't be able to go out and spend thousands of dollars to just hoard Fabrinium. So, with that little bit out of the way, let's go back to the way we currently have booster packs, and I'm stepping a little bit out of the niche realm of doing draft packs, things that other card games are doing. So we'll walk through that here. A booster pack currently set up to have 5 common cards, 3 uncommon cards, and at least 1 rare card or above. The small cache will have 13 commons, 10 uncommons, and at least 2 rares in it, 2 rares or above. The medium cache, same thing. 25 represents commons, 20 represents uncommons, and 5 represents rares or higher quality. Large, 34, 33, and 8. And with bountiful, 44 commons, 46 uncommons, 10 rares or above. At least one of those rares will be a foiled rare or above. With the bountiful caches, a foiled rare will be guaranteed. Now, you don't want to look at it as the same way as other card games for a few reasons. One, the vast majority of cards in the game can switch rarity. So with a starting set of approximately 240 to 250 cards, any of those 250 cards could roll a rare version. The other thing is, Roll of Fate uses a variety of different foiling options, so there's probably going to be foil hunters out there looking for that perfect foil on the one card that they need a rare version of. Now, although 1 foiled rare is guaranteed in the bountiful cache, obviously with the card count going up with the higher level caches that are purchased, the chance to get foiled cards is obviously going to go up with those as well. That is the easiest and most common ways to obtain cards, but as we do promotional events through the years and as Roll of Fate evolves, we may go to conventions or say that we are going to be present at any specific event, and promotional cards may be given away for anybody who visits the booth, or we might even do digital signups sometimes for just watching Roll of Fate official campaigns, and everybody who's watching signs up, uses the code, gets a free card. So overall, that's about how we'll be getting cards across to the players. So let's jump over to the Fabrinium explanation. Fabrinium. The digital currency that will be featured in Roll of Fate. In the Ever Realm, essentially the nexus of all creation, the only thing people there, the residents, want and use for trading and currency is the fabric of existence coalesced into a currency. So let's talk a little bit about Fabrinium and how it affects RoF as a whole. What it will be used for, and my hopes and dreams for it, is a general community currency. Players can use Fabrinium to trade between each other for cards, services, information, lore, snippets, tidbits. Another hope that I really would like to see players using it for is other tabletop RPGs typically have an entry fee for the dungeon masters or the realm shapers for RoF who are hosting a particular campaign. Fabrinium is an interesting way that those realm shapers can charge for their services of creating a campaign for other players to play in. Now, the realm shaper might also offer up specific rewards, foiled commons, foiled uncommons, rares, etc., for completing their campaign, or it could just be for general fun. Fabrinium will also be able to be used for covering entry fees for official tournaments and player versus creator events. Don't happen to have the cash on hand to get yourself into a spot with this team who's going to be challenging a lore boss? No problem. But you happen to have Fabrinium on hand? Cover your entry fee that way. RoF is also going to have a developer-controlled NPC. His name is Nabbit, and he is a Grandmaster Thief, and he is a Weeble race. Kind of like a cat-fox mixture. Little tiny guy that wears a Hamburglar mask and likes to steal stuff. Nabbit will often peddle his wares on the website or even in Discord at random intervals, but the only currency Nabbit takes for trade is Fabrinium. Nabbit will appear in Discord, and in Nabbit fashion, it will never be scheduled or known to the public, but once he makes his post that he has procured these wares, the first person to offer up and say that they would like to buy specified item will be the one to claim the item. It is our current goal to have the Fabrinium tracked and traded through a bot through Discord. So to use the Fabrinium, you're going to have access to the Discord server. That's also how the command will be issued to buy said items from Nabbit. First come, first serve. We have plans for implementation on a way to allow the players in the official campaign to interact with Fabrinium, whether it be to buy additional items or services while they are making their way and traversing through the Everrealm in the official campaign. I would also like to implement a way that during the stream, in fashion that you might see on Twitch, players can interact with minor bits of Fabrinium and either make the campaign a little bit more difficult, or if they see a particular team pushing towards a goal they would like to see met because it may unlock a global achievement or reward for the community might all come together and start helping to just push that team along. Just give them the little bit of extra boost they need. So now let's talk about how Fabrinium is going to work for vendors. Obviously, this is a card game, so I'm going to need vendors to promote my game and sell my wares, my cards. I currently have a plan in place to allow Fabrinium to work for vendors as well. That'll be explained later, but I just wanted to let vendors know, if they're watching, there is a plan in place for that, so you guys aren't going to get left out in the cold. And last, but of course not least, how is Fabrinium obtained? Let me be real with the community here for a second. A lot of the free-to-play games that we see nowadays allow their community to just buy massive amounts of this digital currency. To me personally, I don't see how that makes any sense from a longevity standpoint. Sure, it may help pad your wallet early on, but your game is ultimately going to become a joke that you have 12 players that dominate a field and everyone else is just smashing their phone or their game against their head in a race that they're never going to win or even be competitive in. So Fabrinium may be obtained through subscription tiers, which you'll be able to find on the official Roll of Fate website. Again, you can check that out at the end of the video. I'll have all the links and everything associated with that prep for everyone's usage. Subscription tiers will only award Fabrinium monthly. So Fabrinium is not something you'll just be able to go buy. You're either going to have to subscribe and get it monthly, or as you buy cards, you can trade Fabrinium to other players or trade cards to other players for Fabrinium. I'm intentionally trying to throttle the influx of Fabrinium so that way the community as a whole can come together and help channel the way it evolves. I don't want there to be a massive flood of Fabrinium to any one individual person or group of people, and I have thoughtful ways of implementing stops for that, and that is one of them. So when you hear Fabrinium as a digital currency, please don't let your first thought go to, oh, okay, just another game that's going to allow people to go and buy their way to the top. That's not what Roll of Fate is going to be, and that is not how Fabrinium is going to work. So now let's jump over to the next segment. Hopes, dreams, and plans for ROF's future. General idea of how I'd like to take the roadmap and the trajectory for the game. Conventions. I'd like them to become a regular occurrence for the game. I'd like to be there attending. Educating the community and just new players, bringing new players in all the time because, well, without players, what is the game? Larger scale tournaments, you might be able to see those online and or at your local vendors once I can get a wide enough web cast for vendors to pick the game up. Yearly championship tournaments with custom winner rewards. When I figure out the route I'd like to take for avatars, either taking it with the coin-based avatar or miniatures, I'd like to have metal casts made for either the coins or the miniatures and make those rewards unique in a way that you could see them and think, wild, that team is the one that won the annual tournament or annual championship tournament. I'd also like to get into custom rewards for some of the lore scenarios and player versus creator events, since those will also be extremely difficult challenges to overcome. For roadmap generalities or generalizations, I'm looking to add a guaranteed role edition every year. Again, as a recap, roles are the classes that players will play. There could be other additional roles that are dropped based on events and official campaign trajectory. One guaranteed card expansion per year and possible additions with events as players are completing those as well. One tidbit of information I believe I forgot in the earlier portion of the video. An interesting fact about cards in Roll of Fate is all cards can be used by all players. And my current plan for cards is to never make them go out of season. So cards will be legal in tournaments from their inception till the end of the game. I'd like to start hosting yearly community giveaways, subscription-only giveaways, but also I would like to input vendor giveaways as well, just to give extra incentive for those vendors that are out there promoting the game and, as a whole, enjoying it in their stores. Expect to see community poll events, voting on card art, role names, card name contests to see who can name this card the best, and there will be prizes and other incentives for participating in those specific types of things. Long-term goals, I'd like to maybe hire a team to do graphic novels or try and write my own novel, which might be a little ambitious, so might be a team sitting behind that one. But I think the game has a bright future. I think players who want to get back and really dive into a community-based game that celebrates the community rather than kind of doing my own thing over here in the corner. While I do have my own plans for the game, I'll always make time for the community. And I'd really just like to hear what the community has to say, because sometimes the community has really good ideas. But I think everyone will be excited to see what all is in store in the future. All right, guys, as promised, last little tidbit. Thanks for bearing with me through that video. Just a little bit about myself. Now it's going to seem a little bit more friendly since I'm not so scripted. And I apologize for all the bumbly through the video. I'm not really good at scripted. I'm a little bit better at just casual encounters and talking with people on more casual basis. So just to go over a little bit more about myself, for those that are interested, my name is Zane Morris. Again, you'll come to know me as RoF Weaver or The Weaver, because that's what I do. I'm weaving together this entire game, and that's the name I've dubbed for myself. A little bit of history of Roll of Fate. I originally started this entire project when I was in high school. Just had this idea of a game that had this vast world where players could come together, and I will say that a lot of the inspiration came from my time playing EverQuest. EverQuest, again, I made a point to cover it earlier in the video, but man, I had so much fun with EverQuest. That game was major props to that EQ team back in the day, from original inception up to Planes of Power when I was playing. I don't think I played much after that because the game kind of got a little bit weird with, I don't know, space. And anyways, enough about that. I began creating Roll of Fate, which it was not named that, when I was in high school, and I wanted a game that could encompass many different aspects from a role-playing game's perspective. Obviously, when you have role-playing games, things such as classes, equipment, everybody thinks about these things, but there's always a really unique take to how to implement mechanics to give the game its own feel. Which is why in Roll of Fate I've added quite a few different things and tried to improvise upon games that I've played in the past that have given inspiration. But when I would find things about other games when I was looking for inspiration for my game, I tried to reinvent the wheel, if you will. I would find specific mechanics or features that games had and look at them and think, what do I not like about this and why? Is there a way that I can implement something of this nature into my game without copying it, but also getting rid of all of the pieces that just made me cringe? Well, after I left high school, I ended up enlisting in the United States military, and after I got out of the military, I became a Texas State police officer. So I am a U.S. military vet and a police vet. But after all that happened, I started making a family, and well, looking at my firstborn, my very first baby girl being born, I started thinking about, I guess, legacy. Legacy started coming to mind, and I remembered this game that I had worked on in high school, and then also had kind of started to evolve a little bit when I was in the military. I would take notes and jot things down, but I've had so much more experience at that point when it was just high school. Yeah, I had had my gaming stints, but after the military and after police and now with a family, I've been playing games all these years, so I've had so much experience playing and analyzing games and finding things that I just adored about games and then things that essentially made me want to vomit. Also, some hardship occurred when one of my good friends from high school had a tragic turn in his life, but he was a large part of the push also to continue with this game. Not so much the push to continue the game, I'll say, but he definitely had an impact on the decision that my family gave me to, hey, let's create this legacy. I know my girls will be my legacy and my family is my legacy, but I'd like to leave them something too. And when the game originally came back full circle and started to be created again, I had only had the intention of creating the game for my family so that way it was something we could all play together. It wasn't until I gave one of my friends a quick rundown of the tutorial, and as he was looking at it, he said, "Are you going to commercialize this? Is this going to be something that I want to play this?" And he kind of reminded me when we were younger, you should have been making games since you were younger. And I didn't take the traditional game route of going to become a computer programmer or doing virtual design and animation. Although a lot of the art you will see in Roll of Fate right now, as I would say, taking a guesstimate, 99% of the art you see is mine or I have collaborated with it. But I had a friend in high school. His name was Chris Bedurka. And man, this guy, he was a great friend to me. We used to play card games, Dragon Ball Z, Yu-Gi-Oh, Magic the Gathering, you name it, we played it. And I had such fond memories of playing card games with this guy that's when the card aspect really kind of started to jump into Roll of Fate. And I thought, hey, with what I already have here, can I integrate cards into this and make it fun? Well, what else did we used to play? Well, I love chess and I love Dungeons and Dragons. Maybe I can take a game board and also classes with cards and just... And that's really where Roll of Fate came from. It's playing a tabletop RPG on a grid-based system with a deck builder component and dice to allow for excitement to dictate games, man. There's nothing more exciting than, oh, got to throw this critical roll and it's got to be a 20 and whoa! You know, it's tons of fun for groups of people, but also it can have a competitive aspect. And thus, boom, Roll of Fate was born. So I really look forward to my hopes and dreams for this game. I really look forward to getting a chance to meet a community of players who are excited about a project like this. And also to create it as a whole. Being able to see something like this process come to life is a phenomenal experience, and I really just hope I can share it with the community. I'm humbled by the fact that I've already been approached by so many people who are showing an interest in the game, so the more the merrier, and I really hope you guys enjoy the voyage to the end of completion for the game, which is scheduled to be later in 2023. But yeah, for those who are going to be hopping on board, welcome. And for those who are a little iffy about the project, hey, stay tuned. I plan on doing videos that I will encompass, and I'll put this at the beginning of the video just so everybody doesn't get so jumbled up with all my bumbliness. But I do plan on making a video that will focus on every different aspect of the game: roll cards, how to calculate damage, the board component, player versus player, player versus environment, how a campaign works, getting into the real meat and potatoes of how to build a campaign. I'll make detailed videos about all of these and not put it in such a long video with just bookmarks, so people can find videos that they would specifically want to learn about and say, hey, I'd like to learn more about roll cards, or I'd like to learn more about the rarities and how he plans to implement X, Y, and Z. But again, yeah, welcome. And for those who are a little iffy, hey, stay tuned because more stuff is coming down the pipeline. I will add one more segment to the video at the end, but it'll just be a tiny snippet about the website and how to get in on the Discord, and other social media will be coming. So again, guys, I'm humbled, and thank you very much for sticking with it through that video, and time to roll out.